The 10th Crisis by L.J. Beeston. This is recorded to celebrate the 10th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. With the stealthy step of a cat, Beddoes came up the wide avenue of clipped hollies, his feet making as much sound on the smooth turf as the wind among its minute grass stems. Once in the splash of shadow flung by the gables and chimneys, he halted, sending a strained gaze backward, in search of a possible pursuer. But he saw only the grey-green sea of moonlight on the grass, which was already just touched by the hoarfrost, and the tapering spire of the Scottish fir at the end of the avenue, with its flattened crown of leaves, its needles, set aslant right up under the processional clouds. Half a dozen more yards brought him to as many steps neatly cut in the slope which extended this side of the house. The double glass doors of a French window were at the top of the steps. For 5 minutes he was busy with a diamond cutter and a treacle pad. He put a hand through the orifice thus formed and cautiously drew aside one of the chenille curtains. He saw first a round table with claw feet, a table of black oak, so polished that the 3 lighted candle holders upon it cast points of light as if into a dark pool. There was also an open book upon this table, and a cut glass tumbler, and a decanter with a long neck, and a box of cigarettes. Beside it was a capacious armchair, with cushions in the seat angles. A wood fire chuckled and sputtered sociably. The interior of the room was altogether very cosy and inviting, and Beddoes did not hesitate to enter. He looked round with the penetrating, the all-embracing eyes of the cracksman of experience. It was no uncertain expression which made taut every line in his face. Known to his associates as the Killer, he looked the part, that fatal roll, as he glided forward with his tread of a panther. Just what he wanted was in a cabinet in a corner. He knew perfectly well that it was in there, for he was no chance, no snatch thief. When a little jade clock on the mantelpiece chimed the half hour after midnight, he darted a yellow flash of his eyes at the interrupter, then went straight on. He reached the cabinet. 3 minutes were between him and attainment. Suddenly a calm voice demanded, "What the devil is your little game?" Beddoes spun round as if touched by a hot iron. The man was standing by the table, a man in evening dress. He was brave, this fellow, for he kept his hands in his trousers pockets, and his frown showed only keen exasperation. Beddoes realized this in the moment allowed him. A leap, and his fingers were around one of the brass candlesticks. The other recoiled hastily, collided with the armchair, lost his balance. Beddoes struck home with his heavy weapon, struck with the most brutal force. The man fell across the arms of the chair, as if a rifle bullet had put out his life. Beddoes glared down at the inert form, the candle holder clutched in his hand as if for a second blow. His underjaw stuck out menacingly. A phosphor light played over his eyes. He breathed stertorously. He recovered himself quickly, forced his iron nerve to hold good. Deliberately he relighted the candle on the holder, and replaced it on the table. He poured out some of the brandy in the decanter, and tossed it off. He leaned over the still figure, which had been struck on the back of the head. He lifted it and seated it in the chair, propping it naturally with the cushions. He felt the heart, put his cheek to the lips. All right, ran his desperate thought. He'll come round in an hour. Then he straightened himself, and was already looking again toward the cabinet when he fancied he heard a slight sound. 6 steps would have taken him to the glass doors, 4 to the open door by which had entered the spoiler of his sport. The occasion seemed urgent, and Beddoes chose the 4 steps. He was in a large, square-shaped hall, with thick rugs on its waxed floor. He glided to the side of a deep embrasured window, semi-dark, and waited for developments. He had practically closed the door of the room he had just quitted, shutting out the light, but a pale drift of moonshine poured through the leaded panes of the window, which gave a view of the holly avenue by which Beddoes had approached. His quick roaming eyes showed him 3 doors in this hall. One he had just made use of, another obviously led to the outside night, and the third to another room on his left. Opposite the window was a broad, very shallow staircase. The hall was cosily furnished with some settees and lounge chairs, with colored prints and etchings on its walls. The intruder took instantaneous note of these details, while he considered his way of escape in case of a second interruption. He had not long to wait. A creaking stair drew his heated gaze across the hall. A girl was coming down the oaken, uncarpeted staircase. She paused to lean over the banister, to look intently at the door of the room which Bellows had so hastily left. She had unloosened her hair, so that her posture brought her long tresses, black as the raven's wing, either side of her face, which perhaps, because it was framed in that ebon cloud, seemed deathly pale. Beddoes flattened himself against the wall, cursing his continued run of ill luck. At the same time he was held by the movements of the woman on the stairs, who took each step with infinite caution, and kept stopping to look over the handrail at the door below, which alone seemed to have gripped her attention or aroused her suspicions. As she descended, Bellows saw her eyes shine, heard her quick, nervous breathing. Clearly she had been disturbed by the sound of the scuffle, and he wondered why she came alone to probe the cause of it. He congratulated himself on having placed the unconscious man in a natural position in the armchair. He reflected, she will go in there, and while she is trying to rouse the fellow, I can get out by this window or the door. But it is the devil's worst luck for me. The woman reached the bottom of the winding staircase, her eyes never, for a fraction of a moment, leaving the door of the room. Beddoes saw that she was dark as night, and strikingly handsome. She had loosened her dress of pale green silk, and he saw the shapely throat agitated, as if by an incessant swallowing movement. She was very much afraid, and she has need to be, ran the man's desperate thought. If she sets those staring eyes on me, I'll have to strangle a scream before she makes it. The big dose of neat brandy he had poured down his throat had climbed to his head, and he crouched in the deep shadow like a wild beast. The woman commenced to cross the hall as if its boards were some mine of death. She put up her hands, on which gleamed many jewels, and pushed back the wealth of her black hair. Beddoes noticed the flash from her fingers, and it inclined him to think twice before making his escape. She carried a fortune, likely enough, upon her delicate hands, and he did not see why he should let it slip him. For half a minute he meditated a sudden leap forward, but before he could quite make up his mind, the other had reached the door of the inner room. She pushed it inward slightly. She called out, in little more than a whisper, in a whisper of heart-stopping fear, "Are you there, Edmund?" Receiving no answer, she pushed the door open farther, and went in. Beddoes stepped out from the shadow. In 9 crises out of 10 he could make up his mind in a flash of time, but this was the 10th. He had never been placed in a situation similar. Also, the brandy did not assist lightning decision. At any moment the woman in there would discover that a crime had been committed, and would rush out with a shriek. Should he bolt for it? Should he wait? Should he dart in after her and silence her? As these questions flamed through his uncertain and somewhat clouded brain, the woman reappeared. Her lips were parted with terror, her eyes dilated with horror. Beddoes advanced in a rush, but suddenly he pulled himself up with a jerk. He had seen something gleam in the other's clenched right hand. It might be a pistol, it might be a steel blade. He was not quite sure, but it checked him for an instant. And before that instant passed, the woman had seen him as he stood in the broad shaft of moonlight, and she put her hand down by her side, so that her dress partly covered and concealed it. The action was involuntary. The abrupt apparition of the man before her imparted such a palsying shock that her wits were numbed. She fought for breath. The inward, bizarre light of fear blazed in her dilated pupils. Death seemed in her cheeks and lips. A pulse in her beautiful throat beat wildly, and her disengaged hand pressed upon her heart as if to relieve an agony there. Beddoes caught the wrist in a strong grasp. He perceived at once that this extreme of terror made him a sure master of the situation. "Best keep quiet," he said menacingly. "I won't hurt you, not unless you start screaming. And then I'll be as rough as I know how." "What are you doing here?" she panted. "That's silly talk. I'm not here on a weekend invite. Now what have you got in that other hand? Put it down. I won't stand any fooling." She broke away from him suddenly, putting her right hand behind her. "Give it to me, my beauty," insisted Bellows hoarsely. The flare in her starting eyes had died down a little. She was now mistress of herself. "Take what you want," she replied breathlessly, "and go. I will not stop you." Beddoes considered. Violence would probably frustrate his aim. He resolved to work without it, but to watch her with the utmost vigilance. He moved to close the door of the room which she had just left. "Ah, not there!" she exclaimed wildly, and for the first time he noticed that she spoke with a strong foreign accent. Beddoes closed the door. He was abruptly puzzled by that entreaty. What did she mean? His first conclusion was that she believed the inmate of the room to be slumbering in the easy chair, and that she wished to protect him. But he was forced to let go of that explanation, remembering her excess of terror when she had emerged a minute ago. It was rather baffling, but clearly she did not suspect him of the assault, and he let it go at that, for the moment. While he was closing the door, she had drawn the rings from her fingers. She put them, a tiny glittering pile, upon the back of a settee. "Will that satisfy you?" she asked, shrinking back at his approach. "If so, take them and leave here at once, immediately, before you are prevented." Beddoes picked up the jewels, weighing them in his palm. He scarcely looked at them. All his attention focused on the woman. She mystified, almost troubled him. It was certainly natural that she should want him away, but eagerness, more than anxiety, appeared to prompt her beseeching, and although he had not threatened violence, yet her agitation was increasing to a point which suggested collapse. Never had he seen a face so altogether bloodless, and eyes which held a nightmare of terror. Regarding her with a fierce and puzzled frown, he put the jewels back on the settee, as if they hinted at some trap. He growled, "We will see about that. Suppose we get this door open first." It was the one leading to Holly Avenue. He turned a key and drew a bolt. The inrush of chill air felt good, and gave him back his determination to get what he had come for. "No, I want more than that," said he grimly. "There's a cabinet in that room, and in it there's a box of unset stones." She shook her head wildly. "No, no," she forced her dry lips to answer. "I say there is. Will you fetch it? You'll have to. I'm not fool enough to trust you here alone. Get it, I say, or..." Suddenly an expression which he could not translate passed over the other's face, driving from it the former paralysis of fear. "Ah, yes," she exclaimed in a low voice, "you are perfectly right. There are some unset jewels in the cabinet. I had forgotten. Stay where you are, and I will bring them to you." And she darted swiftly into the room, which she had entered a few minutes ago, in such an agony of trepidation. "Hell seize me, if there isn't a depth here I can't swim in," said Beddoes. The woman was back before 15 seconds had passed. She pulled to the door of the room with infinite care, as if fearing to arouse the inmate from his unnatural slumber. "Here they are," she panted, her eyes shining with a strange light. "Now, go, go!" Beddoes dropped the little silver casket into his pocket, then his right hand gripped the other's shoulder with a crushing, a cruel force. "There's something that beats me in this," he snarled, "something I am going to understand." And he commenced to force the other back toward the room. He had little or no intention to enter it, but he was determined to make her speak. "By God," he went on, as she struggled under his mastery, "I don't believe you are afraid of me at all. Out with it. What?" "Stop!" she exclaimed at the critical moment. There. She could say no more. "Go on. Out with it. Quick!" "In that room. A man. He's dead." Beddoes released her abruptly. "How do you know that?" he mocked. "Who told you he is dead?" I killed him." "You?" "I killed him," she moaned, catching a chair for support. He stared at her as if he believed she had taken leave of her senses. A long, tense silence ensued. She kept pressing her heart as if she was suffocating, and suddenly Beddoes caught another glimpse of something which gleamed in the clutch of her left hand, something which she tried to conceal, which she refused to abandon. At the same instant a clue to the mystery flashed through his amazement caused by her words. It was a steel blade gripped so jealously in her palm. She had descended the staircase, not because she had heard a disturbance, but with intent to go into that room and commit a crime. And she had gone in. She found its inmate in an easy chair, and she had concluded he was sleeping. And so, "You stabbed him!" exclaimed Beddoes aloud, concluding his thought. She did not answer. She could not answer. Her bosom rose and fell in a tumult. "You little devil, you," he went on, "what did you do it for?" She panted, in her terrible struggle for breath. "I was mad." He jeered. "That is to say, you are sorry." "Ah, God knows I am. I killed him because I loved him." "And he loved someone else? You cursed little Italian spitfire." At that moment there was a slight noise, which seemed to come from inside the room, but it was not noticed. Bellows continued, in the same jeering tone. "I thought you were scared of me, but the boot's on the other foot now. Who'd have thought it, to look at you? A nice hell of jealousy you've been stewing in, and now you'll have to pay for it." In a mute agony she regarded him, as if she did not comprehend the brutal banter, fear and remorse imparting an expression almost of insanity in her staring, motionless eyes. "Of course I see through your move now," Bellows went on, wiping his hot forehead, which the heat of the room and the half glass of brandy had dewed with perspiration. "I understand why you were suddenly glad for me to go off with the box out of the cabinet in that room. It occurs to you that I might then be wanted for the business in there. Pretty, I must say. I thought I was cute, but I can't hold a candle to the sense in those delicate brains of yours. What was it you used? Some fancy weapon? You can show it to me now, you know." She extended her left arm jerkily. Inside her palm was a tiny cut-glass vial. She moaned. "I had left it in his room. I came downstairs for it." Beddoes' brows came together in a bewildered stare. "Curse me if I follow even now," he muttered. She panted, trembling fingers clawing at her cheek. "Merciful God, how could I do it? It was in this bottle, that which killed him. I emptied it, every drop of it, into the decanter of brandy." "What?" roared Bellows in a frightened voice. That thunderous shout had not died upon his blanching lips when there came the sound of a heavy, dragging footstep in the inner room. Uncertain fingers fumbled at the handle. The door was jerked back, and the inmate appeared, swaying unsteadily. He saw nothing, heard nothing, for he was still stupefied by the blow from the brass candlestick. The woman uttered a shrill, heart-piercing cry. She rushed at him with extended arms. Beddoes made for the door opening upon the holly avenue. He missed it as if he could not see, found it at a second attempt, ran out into the night. He went down the glade like a madman, throwing distorted shadows upon the frost rime. And suddenly the broad moon and the lamps of the stars in the procession of clouds swung round and round like a whirlpool, with the seethe and roar of an immense whirlpool. End of The 10th Crisis by L.J. Beeston. Read for LibriVox by Ed Humple.